Do you have a need? A need for SEAD? You love the idea of ruling the skies. Love the idea of paving the way for air superiority and allowing your team to destroy enemy units from the air. There's just one thing. You don't know how to SEAD. Your SEAD planes are always shot down and never hit anything. The enemy AA always eviscerate your planes. And it seems more and more that SAMs are too easy to defend and, dare I say, overpowered. But you'd be wrong. I regularly use SEAD to destroy enemy air defense. The difference is that I understand how SEAD works, I know how to micro my planes, and I understand the purpose of SEAD. But I'm here to help. By the end of this video, I guarantee you'll know how to make a SEAD run. You'll see your SEAD planes getting more kills, and see your team enjoying air superiority. But before you can run, you must first learn to walk. And before you can learn how to micro your SEAD planes, you must first understand how SEAD works. Suppression of enemy air defense is the process in which you degrade and destroy enemy air defense. You have many tools for the job: long-range artillery, ballistic missiles, cruise missiles. But for the purpose of this video, we will be focusing on the plane that makes this whole operation go around: the SEAD plane. A SEAD plane uses anti-radiation missiles to automatically find and target enemy air defense. The US's HARM missile has an 8,000 meter range, so if anything in an 8,000 meter range has a radar on, this missile will be sent flying toward that target. No need to spot at all. But there's a catch. Anti-radiation missiles are powerful, and so both armies have developed multiple ways of intercepting these missiles. The first is SAMs, or surface-to-air missiles. The Russian Vityaz, Tor, or Favorit, and the American Patriot systems fall into this category. They intercept enemy missiles from long range, blowing them out of the sky. This means that some systems are capable of defending themselves against SEAD. Then there are SPAGs, or self-propelled anti-air guns. These guns are used to intercept enemy missiles the old-fashioned way, by riddling them with holes until they explode. Some examples include the Tunguska, the Sea-Ram, and the Lav Shorad. And if all else fails, the enemy can simply turn off their radar. When their radar is off, they are completely safe from SEAD missiles. But there's a catch. Radar, when activated, gives a 2 times multiplier to the range and optics of the unit against high altitude targets, and a 1.25 times multiplier to range and optics on low altitude targets, aka helicopters. Forcing the enemy to turn off the radar effectively halves the effective range and optics of the unit, and keeps them from protecting the front line from air attack. Because of this, players want to keep their radar on as much as possible, only turning it off when enemy SEAD is out in the field. This is where the S for suppression comes up in SEAD. While we want to destroy the enemy air defense, the simple presence of SEAD forces the enemy to micro their anti-air, taking their attention away from the front line, and more importantly, forces them to turn off their radar. And of course, there are instances where the enemy believes it has enough anti-missile weapons that it can keep their radar on forever, and simply face the barrage of SEAD missiles wholesale. You'll learn to love when your opponent does this, because as you'll find playing SEAD, even the strongest anti-air networks have an Achilles heel. You'll simply have to find it and exploit it. So now that we've covered some basics, let's talk about how to make successful SEAD runs step by step. Our first choice starts in the deck builder. What type of SEAD plane are you trying to build? On the American side, you have a choice between the USMC's Prowler, the Stryker Cavs F-16CJ, and the Special Forces F-35A. Each have their own attributes and capabilities. The Prowler is by far the most popular SEAD option for its cheapness and availability. A Prowler can be armed with 4 HARM missiles for only 240 points. The Prowler is a slow plane and has no stealth to hide it, so this plane relies on brute force to achieve its objective. You can spawn in 2 at a time for a cost of 480 points, and attempt to overwhelm the enemy's air defense with 8 HARM missiles. While Prowlers work great at lower elos, I would argue that at higher elo play, Prowlers are easily identifiable as SEAD planes, and the enemy will simply turn off their AA until the Prowlers go home. This doesn't mean the Prowlers are useless, as you can still use deception to trick the enemy into turning their radar back on. And I will once again remind you that the simple presence of these SEAD planes drastically reduce the effectiveness of enemy AA. Even if your Prowlers return home without a single missile fired, they are a worthy investment. The next plane on the American side is the F-16CJ. While a bit more costly than the Prowler, at 315 points, it makes up for it in speed, which allows it to more easily surprise the enemy and get you more kills. Each plane can come equipped with 4 harms and also has the ability to defend itself with a few air-to-air missiles in case the enemy scramble their jets. It will cost more to bring 2 out at 630 points, but you may find that this plane will have more success due to its ability to surprise the enemy. Finally, we have an unexpected choice for SEAD, the F-35A. This plane is only capable of carrying 2 SEAD missiles, which would usually be a disqualifying factor for any other plane. But the F-35A has one key characteristic that makes it a great SEAD plane. Its stealth allows it to get closer than any other plane without being detected, allowing it to fire its HARM missiles far closer than normal, giving their AA and the enemy less time to react. Let's check under the hood to give you a better picture. Keep in mind that I've tested this in game, as you'll see on the screen. An unupgraded Favorite system has a 4,000 base range, and more importantly, its optics are 4,000 meters for high altitude targets and 3,200 meters for low altitude targets. Based on my testing, I can verify that low altitude targets include helicopters and low flying planes and drones. With radar turned on, the Favorite receives a 2 times multiplier to its high altitude range and optics, and receives a 1.25 times multiplier to low altitude targets. This means that against high altitude targets, its effective spotting range and firing range is 8,000 meters for high altitude targets and 4,000 meters for low altitude targets. This is when the F-35A's stealth comes into view. With its 1.75 stealth modifier, it reduces the spotting range of the target against itself by 1.75. This means that if a F-35A is flying at high altitude, it will now be spotted at 4,571 meters. And if it's flying at low altitude, it will only be spotted at a staggering 2,285 meters.
Joint Strike Fighter, at your command, sir. Joint Strike Fighter, at your command, sir. New course set. I got hit. Whole stick is shaking.
That means the F-35A has to basically be on top of the enemy AA before it's spotted. This allows the F-35A to essentially shotgun the enemy's air defense point blank. Utilizing hold fire, you can unleash its missiles at around 3 to 4,000 meter range, and then get out of dodge before retaliation can be dished out. I will warn that this is the most micro-intensive SEAD plane to use, and that most players should probably start out with the F-16CJ or the Prowler. Then onto the Russian side. Your options include the motorized infantry's Su-24MP, the VDV's MiG-35, and the VDV's Su-57. The star of the show is the Su-24MP. Essentially akin to the Prowler, this is Russia's cheap SEAD plane. It sets itself apart with its high speed and its ability to carry other types of munitions, such as rockets or air-to-ground missiles. If you can see the enemy anti-air units, it's perfectly viable to dive bomb them and be sure to get the kill with rockets or ATGMs. This flexibility is what makes the Su-24MP arguably better than the Prowler, all of this for the minor cost of 1 SEAD missile. That's not a bad deal. Unfortunately for Russia, this is as good as their SEAD capabilities get. The Su-57 is Russia's pricey option for a SEAD plane at 395 points. It is very fast, has a small stealth bonus, and has 4 missiles. Of course, this means you won't have the Su-57 doing what it excels at, fighting and intercepting enemy aircraft, but it does make a solid SEAD plane if you can afford it. Finally, the worst of both worlds comes in the form of the MiG-35. The MiG-35 is a whopping 385 point cost for essentially the same capabilities of the F-16CJ at a 315 point cost. This is not a very good seaplane, and is more useful as a multi-role fighter. Overall, the Su-24MP is the only dedicated seaplane worth taking for Russia. The Su-57 would be fine if you weren't forfeiting a great fighter for a good seaplane, and if the cost wasn't so high. Overall, Russia tends to put less stock in its dedicated SEAD planes and just equip them to multi-role fighters as a distraction instead. Once you've built your SEAD planes, it's time to figure out how many you bring. The choice is simple, either bring 2 SEAD planes or 4. You simply shouldn't have enough points to run 3 SEAD planes at a time, and 3 is usually overkill anyway. One seed plane at a time is a waste and doesn't have a hope of making it through anti-missile defenses. 2 planes a seed run is that perfect sweet spot in my opinion. Now we finally arrive to the battlefield. First things first, just because you committed to doing seed this game doesn't mean you are allowed to not have a front line. Your teammates need you to help on the front no matter what your overarching goal is. Your seed runs will mean nothing if the enemy take all the objectives. So, find a point that is relatively easy to defend, take it in the early game, build up a defense, and get ready to start banking points for seed runs. My goal every game is to bank enough points to start doing seed runs by phase 2. I feel this is the sweet spot between accomplishing your goal of suppressing enemy air defense and still doing your duty in holding the front line. The weakness in this strategy is if you lose your objective or units early on and have to invest more units into your ground game. That's just how it is. But even when I've started on the back foot, I've still found time to start doing seed runs around the middle of phase 2. Now let's say you've banked enough points to start sorting your seed. Well, some people seem to believe you can just fly your seed planes anywhere and expect their missiles to kill everything. This is plain wrong. Flying your planes over the middle of the enemy air defense will only tend to get your seed planes killed, and this method will spread your seed missiles all across multiple targets to be shot down piecemeal. You will only consistently kill with your seed planes if you pinpoint where the enemy air defense is, as you need to concentrate as many seed missiles as possible in as short a time as possible on a concentrated area. In other words, the objective is not to destroy the entirety of the enemy air defense in one run, but rather to pick it apart piece by piece, one run at a time. For example, I conduct my first seed run and find that my missiles fly toward the northwest part of the map. I see the smoke trail from where the missile was intercepted, and I now know that's where the enemy air defense is. So next run, instead of flying on the same route, I choose to fly over the water and get as close as possible to the enemy air defense. Through proximity and rapidity of fire, I overwhelm the enemy air defense and destroy it. I call the first seed run that I did a probing run. My seed missiles will seek out where the enemy air defense is, and even as they are intercepted, they give me valuable information on where the enemy air defense is. I then mark for my teammates and make a mental note of it. The next seed run, my objective will then be to target the area where the enemy air defense was last spotted. I'll fly low altitude and, if necessary, hold fire until I see the white loading bar on my seed planes, indicating they are aiming at the target. This means my missiles are ready to fire. Then, I let the missiles fly, and through brute force, I will overwhelm the enemy air defense and destroy it. Now that we've talked about how to perform a seed run, let's talk about how to micro your seed planes. The first tip is to make sure both missiles are being fired at the same time. If you simply spawn in your prowlers and don't micro them, they will fly in one after the other, and fire their own seed missiles in sequence, rather than firing at the same time. This gives the enemy air defense the milliseconds they need to shoot down the missiles and survive. But if you were to make your planes parallel to each other as they did their runs, they would both fire simultaneously. Then the enemy would now have to deal with 2 missiles at once. Another method is to hold fire. Hold fire is useful for 2 reasons. One is that it allows you to get as close as possible to enemy air defense before firing, say 5,000 meters away from the target rather than 8,000 meters away from the target, giving the enemy less time to react, and secondly, allowing you to fire both missiles simultaneously, even if one spots the target before the other. The next tip is to attack from 2 different directions. If one plane attacks the enemy air defense from the southwest and the other from the southeast, the air defense will then have to choose which way it defends itself, then attempt to swivel to the other target before it hits them. But then you come across a player with more than 2 brain cells. When he sees seed planes racing toward him, he will turn off his radar to protect his units, and wait for the seed planes to turn around before firing, as your seed planes can only fire at what's in front of them. Thus begins a game of cat and mouse. You can return to base if you shot all your missiles, but if you haven't, you can simply act as if you're returning to base, then turn around as the enemy thinks the coast is clear and turns back on his radar. A smart air defense player against a smart seed player will have this constant back and forth, but it's a seed player that wins as long as his seed planes make it home. Remember, a seed plane's simple presence reduces the effectiveness of the enemy air defense. The last thing I can tell you is to look out for enemy interceptors. A smart player will try to snipe your seed planes with interceptors, and the best counter for this is, of course, your own interceptors. And now, you know how to seed. If you enjoyed this video, like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll consider putting more out there. Thank you, and peace.